Okay, so I'm going to go over EagleSoft here. I'd like to just do an introduction because a lot of new dentists aren't familiar with it. So I'll give you an overview of pretty much everything that is important for doctors, okay? So when I start here, and you can see as EagleSoft loads, you can see the version number and the build number there, okay? That's something to take note of. It's right there, okay? And then you can see here that the users are listed here. Now you'll notice that some of the users are in bold and some of them aren't. If they are in bold, that means that they're an administrator. If they aren't, that means they aren't. Usually the profile that we set up, all users are going to be administrators. Why? Because there's certain functionality inside of EagleSoft that pretty much everyone needs. And if, let's say that your assistant is not an administrator and they're logged into that operatory and you go to check benefits or whatnot and they don't have that ability, then you will be having to log out and log back in as yourself, okay? So you can also see here we do not usually use the EagleSoft Messenger, and so you'll usually unclick that. Okay. The other important thing to know here is the date. Okay. So sometimes your fronts will need to, let's say that they got an EFT that was had a bunch of payments and they received it on the 29th. You can log into EagleSoft on the 29th so that all those payments are posted on that date. Okay. If you do try to log in, what's going to happen is it's going to give you this little error message. This will result in all the information being backdated. You need to be super careful that you're logging into the correct date. And that's the reason why we have most workstations restart every night, because it'll just grab the latest and greatest date. But if you if you don't log out at night, or if this date isn't correct, you can walk out a bunch of procedures and that'll be under the wrong date, and then it really messes things up because then you have to go in and correct all of the service dates. So be aware, it's a functionality that's nice, but can also be a little bit problematic. Okay. At this time, I'm going to also kind of go over this app called Technical Reference. Okay, Technical Reference is basically the back end of your database setup. Okay, so you can come in here, and if you ever need to look at your license number, it's right there. Okay, so sometimes if you're setting up a new workstation, you'll need the license number. Your current license number is right there, so you'll use that for all of the new workstations. Okay, you usually don't use any of these other things. Sometimes EagleSoft will come in and look at these. The only other item that you might want to use is this screen here. Sometimes you will need to change this TCP/IP, and you'll usually say host equals and then either an IP address, or sometimes you will put in your EagleSoft server name here, okay? In this instance, it's working, so we don't need to do that, okay? But that is one screen that you will go into a little bit more frequently. On the server side, usually we've set it up so that there's a little checkbox here so that it disconnects all of the workstations nightly. So usually what we do is we have the server restart nightly, or at least EagleSoft shut off nightly for its backup process, and then it logs all of the workstations off so that you never get this wrong date type of a scenario happening. So anyway, we'll go ahead and log in here. And then the first screen here is called Practice Management. And this is, it looks like just a desk, but really it's a bunch of links to other things, okay? So for example, you can do live help here to EagleSoft. This is actually that same live help. You can also go to on schedule by clicking here, which is the scheduling application. You can go to the clinical screen by clicking here. This is in contact. This is where your staff is going to go into the time clock, and there's other little links here. Okay, so for example, an account payment, insurance patient payment, and recalls here. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through these different screens. Okay, the other thing obviously is you have your menus up here. Okay, and we'll have a lot of different videos on some of the different functionalities here. Um, but first thing obviously is for time clock when you or your employees are clocking in and out, you'll go ahead and choose the particular um, person, and then you can go ahead and click on clock in and clock out. You can also go into the timesheet and kind of modify, or you can, if you're an administrator, you can add dates of times that um, your staff has needed to come or has clocked in and out. But usually you're going to have just one provider that's in charge of all of that. So if you see anything kind of out of whack, it would have had the note that only that provider approved it. Okay, so that's where the time clock functionality comes into. We usually don't use this portion very much. Usually we use a lot of this functionality right through the on schedule. You can get back and forth by clicking on uh, function F9 to come back to patient management. Um, so that's one way to get back. The other way is obviously, I think you click on this front office and then you'll go back to patient management here, okay? Now, the other thing too is we do have direct access to accounts here, okay? And one thing to note is you can press this use last patient and you're going to get the last patient, okay? The other thing too is you can type this here, and you can, and then if you press tab, it will give you all of the patients that have that letter combination. So you can even shorten it just a little bit, and you'll see that it only pulls up those patients. So that's another way to kind of shortcut it. Okay, on these screens, on this account screen, there's tabs down here at the bottom. One for the account, one to walk out new procedures, one to take an account payment. Okay, so the payment types obviously are care, credit, cash. You can take a check, you can take a credit card, and then there's other types of payments that you can take here. Okay. Then this would be an insurance payment if you're applying an insurance check or an EFT to the patient account. And then there's also such things as debit or credit adjustments. Okay, so important to know these particular screens. Inside of here, if your patient is wanting for, let's say, for their um, FSA account or health savings account, if they want a report of everything that they had done over the past year, you're going to just click on report and you're going to choose the range and it will print up all of those dates, okay? Um, and then sometimes you'll see that balance kind of disappears and usually you can just put it back by clicking on that balance, okay? And then you'll also notice that within other screens inside of EagleSoft, they have the buttons to the other, I would call them like sub apps or sub forms here, okay? So from here, we could get to the edit patient screen, to the patient notes, to the odontogram, to the images, to perio charting, all of that kind of stuff. So as you kind of recognize these icons, um, you'll be able to navigate a little bit quicker. Okay, so just kind of watch every screen and see what other types of buttons are available. Okay, so um, I am going to log off, and I'm going to log in under, I think it's the 23rd, which is the date that we have some test patients loaded up. And let's see if it goes into on schedule on that date, and it does. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so with on schedule, this is kind of your main screen here, and I just want to show you a couple of items. So really, we set up uh, our screen kind of like this, and you can see there's times here. This yellow line is actually the time of the day right now, so it's 11:44. So you'll see this kind of going down throughout the day. Okay, um, and so we have these go to day panels and this appointment queue panel. Okay, so if I go um, view, you'll see that the go to day panel is there and the appointment queue panel is there and the on schedule toolbar and the activity toolbar. So let me just show you what happens if I take that off. You'll see that activity toolbar. So those are the four things that you usually are seeing there. Okay, so the go to day panel. Okay, now sometimes you'll see the appointment queue either out here. So what you'll do is you'll drag this here, and then do you see how I can drag it over this little box here, and it'll snap it down to that particular area here. Okay, so the appointment queue is nice if you need to move appointments. So let's say that I wanted to copy this appointment. You'll see that it'll move down into that copy queue. That's how you can move things from one day to the next. Okay, you would copy it and you would put in there. Now, if you wanted to move it, you would essentially click on move, and then you would drag it from here to here. Okay. Now, obviously, these appointments can be drug, um, and you can also see one of the big things is that it has this red um, outline around it. That means that that patient is selected. Okay, so if I select that patient and then I click on edit patient, it's going to automatically pull only that patient. Now, if I unclick and I click off of everything and I click edit patient, it's going to ask me, it's going to come up with a screen that's going to say, which patient do you want? And then you'll fill that in, okay? The other nice thing is obviously over here, we can choose which date. So a lot of times when you're going out 6 months for your prophy, you'll just click that out 6 months button, and it'll take you to the following to 6 months out. Okay, so that's why the go-to day panel and the appointment queue is super important to know. Okay, the other thing that you, as a new doctor, a lot of times you don't know what these buttons are. So what I'll do is you might see your office kind of set up like this, where it just shows the buttons. So all you would do is you would right click and click show text on that bar, and then show text on that activities bar. Okay, and that makes it a little bit easier for you to navigate. There is the ability to set things up inside of this on schedule, although this is mostly set up for your practice. One of the things that you might be doing is if you're adding a new operatory, you could add in more operatories here. Okay. Another thing too is you can right click on particular operatories and open up that operatory. Okay. Or you could open the entire day. Okay. In this case, we're kind of competing against a provider's scheduled hours so that we can't open up this day. But you could make the whole day red or a particular column red there. Okay. So this brings us back to practice management. Let's finish up here with on schedule. So obviously, when you when you double click here, it's going to bring up the appointment. And if you type in appointment notes down here, let's say that we're just going to use the test patient. If you type in appointment notes down here, I'm just going to type it here. You'll see that it's going to show up right there. Okay, and then it also has some other identifying information, like this is an 11-year-old female. Okay, and then obviously you're going to choose the appointment type right here. Okay. There is something called a quick fill list. So if you're in a super busy practice and this patient would like a call if something opens up sooner, you can select that. That will fill that into the quick fill list that you need to make some additional notes for. Okay. You can also take a look at lab cases, and again, here's those icons up here. So within here, you can add other things. So that's just kind of a brief overview of OnSchedule. Um, um, okay, so let's go into practice management again, and I'm going to show you really briefly on how we're going to set up a provider. Okay, so when you set up a new provider, okay, there's other videos on this, but this is a very important time that you need to put in this ID. This ID is super important in other parts of your practice, so that you can easily identify who it was that did that particular procedure. So in my case, I would be putting in JRS here. So my first, middle, and last name. If you do not have a middle name, you'll probably put in something like this. Okay, JXS, meaning there is no middle name. You'll need to put in your first and last name. And a lot of times you're filling this in for your particular staff member, and it's important to put all of this information in. If there's a time where you need to call that staff member because maybe another staff member is out and you're trying to fill the schedule, you're trying to fill the staff schedule, you would need to have access to their phone. Birth date is super important. You're going to need that information for W-9s. Hire date is important. There's a lot of benefit type of stuff that happens after a certain amount of time, so you need to know when they hired. A lot of times, if someone is applying for a house loan, they need to know when they were hired. So your doctors or your assistants or your fronts or your hygienist, you need to know their hire date. Social security number, again, super important. Okay, position. This is very important to make sure that this is all set up correctly. Okay, when you are starting, obviously all collections go to self, but when you're starting, you might be an associate doctor who hasn't completely gotten all of your credentialing information back. And so what you would do is you would choose your owner doctor as the provider on insurance here, okay? Master standard fee, this is usually for GPs. You're going to use the master standard fee. If you're an oral surgeon, you would be using the oral surgery standard fee, okay? You'll put your private email in here, and then if you're a provider of services, you'll do that, and you'll do active and use the time clock. If it's a dental assistant, then you'll just say staff member. The color doesn't make a huge amount of difference, okay? If you're a provider, you'll need to set up some identification things here. Usually the corporate team is going to come in here and help you to do this, but really these are the bigger informations on this particular column, and then up here. It's really important to have the same bank account listed here as what your owner provider does. If not, it's going to print up 2 day sheets. So if you ever, and you probably won't deal with this right now, but if ever your front complains that there's 2 day sheets, it's because this account number doesn't match up with what your owner account number is. Essentially, there's 1 day sheet printed for every account. EagleSoft is set up so that there could potentially be 2 owners where the money goes into different accounts. There is also security here. Um, and this is the portion where you can set up or you can apply your security profiles. So for example, if we come into, let's come into me, um, and you go into security, you can see that I am set up as an OA owner, okay? If you want for staff members, just click on OA staff here, and it will set all of their particular security profiles. So they can essentially do pretty much everything except for modify time clocks and things like that. Okay, so make sure that you come in and you set your OA owner or staff for the particular security profile. Okay, and then this is where you manage your passwords. Okay, usually with your passwords, I mean, you can set up these security questions. Usually I just do A for all of the questions and answers here, okay? The security profiles are found here. If you go to security profiles, you can see how to modify those, okay? But those are usually standardized coming from the corporate team, okay? So that's kind of how to set up a user. There's a lot of information up here. The only one that really that you're going to use here is maybe claims. So part of your weekly checkoff list, you're going to check to make sure that all the claims are out, and to make sure that it's also a place where you can see if there's outstanding claims that haven't been paid. Super important functionality there. The other thing would be reports, okay? So we'll be doing a separate video on reports and what each report is about and what we use them for, but you can access them here. I really like to simply just go to my favorites, and these are the ones that we're going to be going over in a separate video, okay? But you can get access to those reports there, okay? Let's just kind of go through here. So file preferences, super important area here. In general, this area here is to get access to your server to make sure that you can get back and forth with the data that's there, which is all of your images, your x-rays. The other thing too is with x-rays here. There's a lot of videos out there, and we'll have more details in the future on how to set all of this stuff up. But this is usually set up, but this is where you would access that information, okay? And then, there's sometimes that, it seems like spell checking is being used a little bit too often. So that's set up here. So kind of come through this preferences screen and kind of figure out what is allowed here. Your path on your Perio, we define it here so that everyone uses the same way. But also, when you're first setting up your EagleSoft, a lot of times this is not checked by default using solid fill, so your odontogram is going to look very weird. So you click on use solid fill, and then sometimes your ledger doesn't have the colors on it, so you usually click this. So that's kind of a brief overview of the preferences screen. Inside of here also is printer administration, okay? And this is the way to assign a printer for the different functionalities inside of EagleSoft. Within here, I've set up my printer and my appointment card to go to my Dymo label writer, okay? There's other videos on that, okay? Activities, there's a lot of different things that will happen here. Usually if you kind of don't know where things are, you can go to either activities or lists, and it will have all of those things set up here, okay? So let me just kind of go down activities and tell you kind of the things that you'll have videos on or you'll use. So the account is obviously a patient account. In contact, we don't usually use that too much. Receive payment, yes, we do use that, but not through this button. receive insurance payment. Sometimes bulk insurance payments will come in, and you can set that all up using this. Um, we don't use the payment plan as much, usually because we're having that hosted at a different service. Okay, lab tracking, super important to understand where your lab cases are. Prescription writer, we use that to print all of our prescription. Okay, patient signatures, don't use that. SmartDoc is your repository for all of your online or your electronic documents for like your new patient forms and your benefit breakdowns. Treatment plan, we use that within the odontogram just to basically figure out when patients are going to get work done, and we can phase treatment plans. Recall Wizard, we don't use that as much. We have another program that goes out there and texts patients 2 weeks after they're due. Um, Processing insurance claim, that usually we do it right through the claims button. And then the ERA is also through a different button. Okay. The time clock, we talked about that. That's over here. Okay. Practice management. This we use a lot. We use it's called the Money Finder, which is basically a report to try to find patients who need treatment that haven't come in a while. Okay. Routing sheets, we use that all of the time. It's the paper form that basically follows the patient around the practice to make sure that we know where the patient is and what they need done, and if they're scheduled for future appointments. On schedule, okay, that is our scheduling program that we talked about. Task manager, we use that occasionally for basically between the accounts receivable and the doctor, so that it's basically a way to keep track of what we need to do with inside of EagleSoft. Patient photo, there are some practices that take a patient photo every time a patient comes in. And then clinical, usually we don't access this through this. We'll do that through the odontogram. So there's some of the activities on the lists here. A lot of things that we do here. You can access persons, which can be, let's say that it is a spouse of a patient. They're not actually a patient there, but we do have to build them out as a person. Obviously, the provider staff we've gone through before. Referrals. We can set that up for like inbound referrals. I wish this had more functionality to send outbound referrals, but we don't use that a ton. Insurance companies, super important. That's a list of all the insurance companies that we work with, all of the employers. The standard fee list, that is the fees that we charge out to patients if they were cash. Fee schedule list, those are the fee schedules for all of our insurance companies. Coverage book lists, those are all of the exceptions to the rules. And then we have service codes. We use this quite a bit if we're potentially looking at how this is all set up. So it basically, for associate doctors, you usually are not going into the service code list because everything is on the odontogram, but you can set it up in your chart or on your odontogram from this screen. We also have exploding codes. These are super important. These are essentially all of the procedures that we do grouped into one code. So for example, when we have a new patient limited exam, that is a panoramic and a limited, okay? So if we were going to go walk out a procedure, instead of us having to type in a D0140 and a D0330, instead we'll type in NPLE and it'll explode to those two codes. So get very used to using exploding codes. It's going to save you time, and it's also going to allow you to not forget that you need to walk out those particular codes. For example, new patient child. Do you really want to walk out those 4 codes every single time, or do you just want to type in new patient child prophy, and it explodes to those codes, okay? I'll show you very quickly um, on how that works. So for example, I'm in test account, okay? So I can, instead of walking out all of those codes, I could walk out new patient child prophy and then click on tab, and you'll see that all of those codes will explode. So I'm going to just close that, discard that, okay? IntelliCare, don't use that. Letters, this is something that we use quite a bit, okay? So for example, if we are on the test patient and they want a work excuse, what we can do is we can go into here and go to letter, okay? And so we have a school excuse letter, we have a work excuse, okay? And then when you go in and preview, you'll see that it has all of the patient information there. And we have a blank spot up here so you can put it on letterhead, and then your front can just basically print out this letter. So super important to know how to use those letters so you don't have to handwrite those letters, okay? Practice information, this is usually set up on your when you first start out your uh, entity, and it's set up by the corporate team. Application interfaces, we don't use that much. Document groups, don't use that much. Auto notes, that's where your notes are organized. Again, we've kind of vetted these out, so you're not going to really make any modifications to these. And if you are, you definitely need to check in with your owner doctor. And then we have the smart notes, which is basically the answers to the responses. So sometimes you're going to need to come in here and go, GP assistant name. If you add in a new assistant, you'll add that so that that's auto-filled into the smart or the auto notes, okay? And especially with GP provider name, if you're adding in a new provider, you'll want to add that right there, okay? The other thing too is medical history forms. You're not going to mess with that. That's set up by corporate. Lab tracking, we'll go over that in a different video on how to do that. And then just some general setup type stuff. Sometimes you're going to need to do new patient alerts. That will be here, okay? Account alerts, that would be here. A lot of these types of things are set up by corporate, so you usually aren't going to make a lot of changes here, okay? And then we do have the prescription writer, where we have the prescription drugs and the templates. Sometimes, again, usually you're not going to set up new templates because we've already kind of gone through several doctors of what needs to be set up. Okay. We'll have a different video on the reports. Okay. Online, you can do live help here, so you can go here and you can put in your practice information and chat with EagleSoft directly. And then under utilities, there are some updates. For example, when you go to reset insurance balances at the beginning of the year, that would be here, okay? Fee manager, if you're importing fees from a different office or from corporate, usually you would do it there. There is also a mass patient transfer. That would be as if a doctor left or a hygienist left, you would do that mass patient transfer there, okay? sometimes you need to go in and kick all users off so that you can do something with the standard fee schedule. That's going to be on this little area here, remove all users. So you'll go into the doctor's manual and it'll have the password that you need to use in order to be able to do that. So a lot of this other type of stuff you aren't going to really use. Sometimes we use this credit card setup if you're getting a new credit card machine to integrate it. All right, so let's go back to on schedule. And so I'm going to show you here. A lot of times, what are kind of the main things that we're going to be using up here? Account, walkout. These actually go to the same screen but a different tab. Claims, okay, lab tracking, okay. So let's just go over lab tracking really quick. So and there will be a separate video on that, but when you go in, this is how you create a lab for the patient, okay. And you're going to want to make sure that you choose the correct laboratory, the correct case type, choose the right tooth, choose the right shade, and put any information here, and then you'll go ahead and print that, and then that will go out to the lab, okay? There is a little bit of, you can also, if you apply that particular lab case to that appointment, you're going to see that there's a little flask here identifier, and you can see that this flask is half empty, meaning the lab case is not in. If you want to, if that lab case was returned, let's say that it was returned on the 22nd, when you go into there, you'll see that the flask goes to full. Okay, so that's a brief overview of how lab tracking. Okay, prescriptions, the same thing. I would click on the patient, click a prescription, and then the important thing on the prescription is that you fill out the RX template, not the drug. Many times, if you fill out the drug, and this is kind of a newbie kind of mistake, is you'll go to drug and you'll choose amoxicillin. The problem is, and let's just go ahead and do a new one here. If I went to amoxicillin, the problem is it's not going to fill out the RX instructions. So what's going to happen is you'll print it out, you'll sign it, and then you'll get a call from the pharmacy. There's no instructions on this, so make sure that you're always using RX template, okay? Okay, so prescriptions, treatment planning. Treatment planning is again something we use quite a bit. You can have existing treatment plans here, or you can create new plans here. And then one of the, let's say that we're just, let's just call this new, okay. Very rarely, and what we can do here is very rarely we use this, but you can do pre-authorizations from this treatment planning screen. So if you wanted to print the treatment plan, you could do it up here, but you could also send in a pre-authorization to an insurance company through that. So that's one of the functionalities of the treatment plan. We'll have a separate video on treatment planning, obviously. Okay. Smart Doc, we talked about, is the electronic repository of all of their patient forms and their treatment plans. And then the edit patient screen, obviously very important. This is how you get all of the identifying information for the patient. You'll use this patient or this edit patient all of the time. Okay. Memo we use quite a bit to just put notes in for the patient when the last time we verified their insurance. Okay. Medical history is going to be used every time the patient walks in to make sure that we have their latest and greatest medical history filled out. Now, this medical history corresponds to the websites or the new patient forms on the website, so it's very easy to transfer one to the other. okay? Then we have their perio exams here. There's another video on this, but we can access this here, and we can compare past perio probing depths. And you can see here that the red is teeth that are missing. The black are teeth that are present. Usually you're going to go to the odontogram first, mark the teeth as missing from there, and then you will and then you'll see it disappear off of the perio. Okay. View images, those are all of your x-rays. Okay. So you can access them through there. And then note history, those are our notes for the patient. And there's a separate video on how to create the notes, but essentially if we were doing a filling, we would come in here and let's say that we're going to do a filling and we're going to insert the auto note, and then it's basically going to ask us a bunch of questions to get through our note. Which is very, very nice. And so then that's as simple as it is to make a note for a patient, and then we could save the note. Okay, so that's important to know. When we do have those auto notes queued up, we can, and that auto note was back here. When it is in this form, we can add in additional fillings that we did by copying and pasting those so that we can easily make those notes super legible and super concise. Again, I was logged in under the 23rd, even though today is the 31st, and you can see that that note was logged as the 23rd. Okay, so that's important. If you're trying to complete your notes for yesterday, you might want to log in as yesterday and do all of your notes for that day. Okay, and again, we can get two other buttons through this screen here. Okay, routing sheets, that's important. We can print all patients, all the routing sheets for a particular day, and we would sort them by chair. Okay, or we can print just one routing sheet. If you choose this patient here, I can just print that particular routing sheet, which happens a lot when you have a new patient that schedules same day. Okay, so these are called day at a glance and month at a glance. I only use day at a glance, which is basically this view. You can go to month at a glance. Month at a glance is very important because it kind of shows you your production for the day. It shows you how many appointments, and there's a lot of nice information down here, the number of new patients. If you click on this link, you can actually see the number of patients and their names by day. Okay, and you can see monthly totals and things like that. You can also highlight particular days, and it will tell you your production and your new patients for that selected range. Okay, so you'll go back to day at a glance to go back to the day view. Okay, creating blocks is super important. Okay, so two ways of doing that. You can click that button, or you can simply double click here, and instead of creating an appointment, you'll create a block, and then you can put the information in there, and then that creates that red block. Okay, you can go forward and back 7 days. Okay, this locate button is very important. Okay, so for example, if I want to find all of the appointments for that particular patient in the future and in the past, if I click on this locate button, it has two tabs here. Okay, so it looks like the patient has come in the past for these appointments, and the patient, if I click over here, does not have any more future appointments. This is super important on figuring out what has happened in the past. how often your patient has been in here, and especially how many excused absences they've had. We keep track of patients and putting them into an OP3 status if they have no-showed a lot of times, and we do that through this locate button. So really remember this locate button. You're going to use that a lot. Obviously, if a patient calls in and says, hey, when is my next appointment? You're going to click off all patients, click on the locate. It'll ask you which patient you're looking for. You'll type in that patient, and then it'll find all of the appointments. The nice thing is let's say that I'm looking at this test appointment. Okay. If I go in here and I double click on this appointment here, okay, so let's actually double click on this appointment here. You can see in the background, you can see in the background that that appointment is selected. So I'm currently on the 17th of July, but let's double click here on that Sunday and look. It basically took me to that appointment and highlighted that appointment. So if I click here, it goes and it highlights that appointment. So it's really important to really understand this locate button and how that works. Okay. A lot of these things we're not going to really use. We don't really use the goal or the schedule notes. So that's kind of the day at a glance, okay, and the on schedule. One of the most important things here is obviously going to the chart of the patient. And there's going to be a huge video on the functionality around the odontogram. But essentially, you can get to the treatment plan from here. This down here is called the ledger. Sometimes you'll be like, what happened to that information down here? If you just click on this ledger button, you're going to see it appear and disappear. The same thing with the images on the right. You can click here and click here, okay? As associate doctors, you want to mainly just use the buttons over here. So just a quick, if you're going to extract this one, you have the main button, which is a surgical extraction, or you have a drop-down menu with all of the different codes, okay? Real quickly there, a supernumerary tooth has its own S code instead of a D code, so that would be in there. And then you can have some of these codes be exploding codes. So for example, if that needs a root canal buildup and crown, here is a root canal buildup and crown exploding code. So we would just say yes to the crown, yes to the core buildup, and yes to the root canal. Okay. Under here, you can override fees. For example, if you're doing oral surgery and the oral surgeon is going to see them and it's going to be a higher fee, you can overwrite those. Usually, you're not going to do that. And then there's kind of a sub status here. I don't like accepted. I like proposed, referred. Those two you can do. If you do referred, it'll turn up orange on your odontogram. But I really don't like the accepted because then you have to kind of unwind some things. And then sometimes you can override the tooth here. So for example, if I did that and I needed to move, I accidentally did it on 16. I want to move that to 15. I could essentially go here and move this to 15, and then you'll see that the root canal move from one to the next. So kind of spend some time going on the odontogram and figuring out what the draw types look like, what everything looks like. Obviously there's some other conditions here like an impacted tooth. This one is super important to use because when we put it as impacted, when we go to the perio chart, which is, I like to use this menu here. So I'll use perio chart. You'll see that tooth 1, since I noted it as impacted, it disappears from the perio chart, okay? The other one here is you want to use view images. A lot of times I see doctors putting this digital x-ray. That means we're going to take a new x-ray. View images says that we're going to look at past x-rays that have been taken, okay? So sometimes I'll go into perio from here. Sometimes I'll go into view images. And then you can also, when you're doing your chart notes, you can go right from here and it'll open up the chart note mechanism. So the nice thing about doing it right here from the odontogram is if you do it from the odontogram, it's going to select the note type as chart note. If you simply do it out here from the data glance, it's going to set it up as a general note. So it can kind of end up in a bunch of different spaces where it shouldn't be, just because you didn't go from the odontogram. You really want to make sure that this enable spell checker is off when you do your chart notes, or you're going to spend a lot of time trying to do spell checker. Okay. So that's kind of the overview of how to get around EagleSoft. It's really important to discuss with your owner doctor the functionality, and you're going to get very well versed in EagleSoft very quickly. And just spend some time playing around, usually with the test patient. And if you do walk things out, make sure that you delete them, because it will modify production and things like that. So basically an overview of everything EagleSoft. And it's been found to be a very user-friendly program. People that have come from Dentrix seem to like it. People that have come from Open Dental seem to be okay with it. And then a lot of the dental students like it a lot more because it's kind of one-stop shop for everything versus what they're used to at dental school.